thanks everyone for joining us. As I said earlier, our webinar today will be on ground nesting seabirds. So mostly terns, noddies, gull and boobies. Although some other species like pelicans also nest on the ground sometimes, or depend on colonies actually. So as you know, the Caribbean Seabird Census, the 2023 Caribbean Seabird Census is underway. And we already have census going on, surveys going on in the region. And in Turks and Caicos, they've been doing a lot of censuses recently. And so this is very important this year because it's really the first coordinated seabird census for the region. So we're trying to bring everybody together to do this survey at the same time this year and then over into next year for those species that nest over the year change. Sorry. So what are the aims of the census? It's really to collect data that are comparable across the region. For that, we'll use standardized data units like apparently occupied nest, AON. That will be really the gold standard of data, because then we can really understand if there are species that are nesting and how many of them are nesting. We will try to obtain a wide data coverage, so in terms of number of colonies visited, but also the geographic area. And really the result are to update our knowledge of seabirds. The last census was more than 10 years ago, if not older. So that would really help us to estimate population numbers, update distribution maps, and also provide data for species status reviews, site management, local site management, species conservation plans, and work on the islands. And also something that's very important for us at the Seabird Working Group is to improve skills for monitoring seabirds. So provide kind of a support network. So if you would like to do it as part of your job or just are interested to do it, you would know that you can reach out to us and ask questions. And these webinars that we had last year and this year with the species hours are really meant for that, to provide this kind of support and improve skills. We have a brand new census coordinator. Well, she's not brand new in the Caribbean, but the position of census coordinator is brand new, Louise Sones. So she's worked with seabirds. I'll ask you to introduce yourself right after. So you can contact Louise at that email address, caribbeanseabirdsurveys@gmail.com, and she will be using it as well. And then I'll finish with the webpage. So on the census webpage, you can find information about the census, the data sheet we're sharing, the reporting data sheets, as well as recording of all the webinars we had last year and this year. Louise, would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Louise Sones. I've been based out in the Caribbean for the last 11 years. So some of you might know that I was in Anguilla for quite a long time, working with the Anguilla National Trust. I first went actually to do seabird surveys on Dog Island when they were undertaking a rat eradication. And then I was supposed to be there for a season and I stayed for 10 years. So we've been doing a lot of seabird work over in Anguilla. We've got 7 offshore keys, we've got 13 breeding seabirds, and we actually completed our seabird counts there last year. So that will be feeding into this bigger regional effort. I'm not in Anguilla anymore now. I'm based in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I've recently been helping out EPIC with some seabird tracking down here as well. So that's me. So I can be I'm the contact now for any seabird survey work questions. If I don't know the answer, I can pass it on to the rest of the team. So you'll be hearing from me again a lot, I guess.
Thank you. All right, so we'll start with this species hours. So I will just introduce our panelists. So very briefly, they will tell us where they work and which species they work. and then we'll start asking questions. So I have Jen, who is next or first.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Yeah, thank you for inviting me here today. I am Jane Wilkinson, and I'm based in the Cayman Islands, where I work for the Department of Environment in our Terrestrial Resources Unit. So I deal primarily with iguanas and birds, of course, endemic plants and stuff. But for today, what's relevant is our least terns, our bridal terns, and our brown boobies. Brown boobies on Cayman Brac, and our least terns and bridled are primarily on Grand Cayman, but some least terns on the Sister Islands as well.
Thank you. Then Louise, if you wanna, I guess you just did it with Anguilla.
Yeah, you want me to say again? Yeah, relevant to this, we've surveyed brown boobies, marsh boobies, a big colony of sooty terns nesting under scrub. We've got bridal terns. Yeah, oh, laughing gulls. There are relevant species.
Thank you. Luis?
Hi, I'm Luis. I'm a master's student. Well, thank you first for the opportunity to be here. I
am not hearing you, Luis. Am I the only one?
I'm not hearing him either. All of a sudden, we lost him.
Yeah.
I don't know why. He's not muted. That's strange.
No. No, we don't hear you.
Sorry, Luis. I don't know what happened.
Can you disconnect and reconnect? Okay. Melgar? Está mudado.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. My work is in I know in the institution the work in the only is contact assessors and the research in the Yucatan for in the real lagartos and jumbaland y arrecife alacranes in the monitoring the birds, principal flamingos en real lagartos y boobies en arrecife alacranes, no? These are my experiences in the different technique, no? In para flamingos is now I work in the boobies, no? This is for is experiment new techniques in the use in the drone and is in the photograph the contact, no?
Gracias. Thank you. Adriana?
Hi, I'm Adriana, and I live also in Yucatan, and I have been working with seabirds, specifically boobies and terns, for more than 20 years. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Rhiannon?
So at the moment, I'm working in the Turks and Caicos Islands. I have 16 species here, 14 of which breeding, but the ones that are relevant to today, we've got 8. So we've got 7 species of terns, most of which breed on the ground, and brown noddies, laughing gulls as well. So a range of different habitats and breeding strategies that we're monitoring here.
Yeah. Antonio, if it works.
Hey, hello everyone. First and foremost, congratulations for Lisa for her important results, her friends. Okay, I am Antonio Garcia Quintas from Cuba. I started to work with seabirds a few years ago, mainly with some species associated to mangroves, such as pelicans, picket birds, for example, and herons. And after, I started to work with Gulls terns, basically in the southern areas of the country. Now I am working, I belong to the Coastal Ecosystem Research Center, placed in the north of Cuba. And I am associated to the French IRD during my PhD study. And in this study, I work mainly with terns and gulls of my country.
Thank you. We still have Anne, and then we'll go back to Luis after. You're muted, Anne.
Huh.
There you go. Oh, you're muted again. You still muted?
Great.
Okay, start.
It won't. Yeah. Okay. All right. Starting again. So yes, I'm Anne Sutton. I live and work in Jamaica. I've been working on seabirds for about 40 years, starting on mostly sooty terns, but also more recently on the other species of terns that occur in the Caribbean, and boobies. So mostly on offshore keys.
Okay, thank you. Luis, shall we try again?
Okay, now? Okay, perfect, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Luis Ramos. I am a master's student in Puerto Rico, working with listerns. In the past, I have been working with different seabirds in different parts, like in Alaska and United States, Virginia, and New York.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. So my name is Ivan Sadje, so I didn't introduce myself. I'm one of the co-chair of the Seabird Working Group. I'm based in the US, but I work with colleagues in the Caribbean. I do not really do censuses, so that's why it's very good to have a panel of experts. So, all right, so let's imagine and dive in. We are on our boat going to an island where we know there are birds nesting on the ground. So we arrive toward that site and we see seabirds nesting there. What is the best? What is the first step you would take? One of you would take to try to assess the population there, and what should we do? All right, I know Rhiannon, you've been doing it on boat, so I'll put you on the spot.
I mean, it totally depends. If I have no prior knowledge, or am I? Because I think there's so many different methods you can use, and it depends on which species we're talking about. So, I mean, we use a lot of drones here now because there are so many inaccessible habitats. So, if you already know that your habitat's inaccessible, then hopefully you'd go with some plan with a drone. They're becoming more and more useful, but I know that was a different webinar we did. But I think it depends on how big your colony is and the behavior of the birds. So for a lot of the tern species, for example, we have some that will nest in mixed species colonies very close together, that are very clustered, like the royal terns and Cabot's terns generally you see quite together, but they're quite small. They're smaller colonies in the areas that I've been to. And then brown noddies are quite often here with sooty terns, and they're in large numbers, and they behave completely differently when you approach with a boat. So there's a sort of range of different methods. We're using anything from flush counts, because if you even rock up in a boat and people get off the boat, the birds flush, to counting from boat, to doing plots if you aren't able to sample your whole population without huge disturbance. So yeah, it's I think it's quite species specific and probably colony specific as well.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that answers your question, but
a little bit, I guess. Jan, oh, you were uploading, you were not raising your hand.
I was trying to raise my hand, but I
okay.
I just wanted to add something too with what Ria is saying, that it is so specific to the individual colonies and the individual species. But one thing that has been important for us here too, we have very small colonies, like the bridal terns, only like 24 to 30 nests. But what's been helpful upon approaching by boat is to see at what distance do the animals flush, because that will inform your management of that site. For example, say you want to restrict a small key from anyone approaching during nesting season, you know, what is the protected area? It's not just the key, it's, you know, do not approach within X amount of feet. So that's something to bear in mind too, you know, see how close do you get before you disturb the birds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point, because as we do census, which is the theme of this webinar, we also want, sorry, we also want to make sure we're protecting and doing different things at the same time. So that idea of knowing the distance is very important for the protection of the colonies later. So, Melgar.
This is the drone and the monitoring the birds. The difference, the technique now is this is good in the habitat inaccessible. For it's very important is on in the birds, the are extension, the nesting, the birds, and the photograph, the drone is on the, I know the traduction in English, or photomosaicos. This is the different softwares and the application is on all the sites and in only photomosaico. This is a permit, it's in the count and the nesting and the individuals, the species, and all the moments now. And in different the days they count, but for the photograph is the days. Okay, I know see it's possible in Terns.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, it makes sense. We'll talk about drones a bit later also, because I know it's been used by a good number of you. And we also have a webinar specifically about drones. Maybe Lisa or Jennifer, could you share the link to that webinar, if you don't mind, in the chat? All right, and Luis, I know you've been working on listerns on the mainland. Do you have also recommendation about approaching the colony, and what do you do from a distance, or it's more about going there and then starting to survey right there?
Well, I think it just depends where's the colony, because you can do, well, I do both methods, counting the sitting birds from distance and trying to estimate how big is the colony. But if you're looking for like reproductive success, you need to go into the colony and make the survey in the colony. I don't know if I answered your question. But
no, it does. All right, so we've been approaching that colony, and let's start with a small colony to start with. We have a small tern colony or a few boobies nesting in a small key. So, Luis, could you talk to us about the methods you use for boobies when you do a total count for a small key, for example, or small colony?
So what we've done, we've got a few small keys with nesting seabirds. So what we would do is, first we would, if we can see most of the island by boat, we would circumnavigate the island and just do a quick count as best we can. I mean, it's always rocky and it's a bit hard, you miss things, but so it's best just to have a quick count before you get onto the island if you can circumnavigate the island. And then if it's safe to get on the island and it doesn't seem to be causing too much disturbance, we would get on again, like maybe take stock as we're there, look around, see what we can see where we can see there's obvious areas of nesting, and then make a plan how we're going to just walk through. Depending on the side of the island, it's generally okay just to walk, 2 people looking and recording, just recording what we see as we pass it if it's a really small island. And you can do most of that. You can work that out mostly from as soon as you get on the island, you can see what's going on and where you should be surveying. So that would be a small island approach, I think.
Yeah. Or small colony.
Small colony, yeah.
Small number of birds just to count, yeah. Adriana, with boobies, are you in this situation as well in Yucatan? With a small number to count, or it's mostly bigger colonies?
The masked boobies is a very big colony.
Mhm.
And when you approach by land, by sea, the island is not too big, but you can't see anything or almost nothing from the boat. So you have to go down, and there are like big patches of nests in the beach and in the vegetation. It's a quite flat island. So from there, you need to decide what to do. If how many people are going to count, how many time do you have, etc., etc. No, if they are nesting, if they are not nesting, and here is very variable. You can never know what you are going to find because maybe you 3 years in a row in November there are many nests, and then the next November there is nothing. So you have to explore first, like to invest a few hours to see what is the situation and then to decide. But from the boat, it's impossible. You have to go down and see what is happening.
Okay, thank you. So for a small number of birds, then it looks like the method you've been doing is a total count. Most of you, I guess, which is, as Luis and Adriana explained, involves counting all the nests there with the recorders and people going through the colony. Just as we're talking about walking through the colony, would you have a recommendation about trying to avoid disturbance or predation by other species? Luis, you talked about laughing gull being there, and we know that laughing gulls are predator of other species' nests. How do you avoid that from happening?
We're just trying to move as quickly through the colony as you can, safely and as quickly, and not hanging around. So not looking in the nest, not stopping to take lots of photos, just moving as quickly as you can. And that's the, if you do see that there's laughing gulls or frigate birds coming to harass them, then really you've got to move away. You have to move away and change your options. You don't want that happening. So if it really is causing that much disturbance and predators are coming in, it'd be better to do a maybe less accurate flush count, or not actually counting every nest, I think. So you've got to be really aware of what's going on around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned flush counts. So who else is doing flush counts? Jen, is that something you did as well in the Cayman?
Yes, we take the opportunity as we arrive on the small keys to do flush counts, and with the least terns, because they flush quite readily off of Sand Key, and there's like more than 100 birds there. It's very difficult for us to do it sort of very precisely with one person. So we always have at least 2 independent counts, and we try to get footage too of the sky, like video, that we can then take frame by frame and count later on, and hopefully, and in most cases it matches, the adult count matches with half the number of nests. So we know we're pretty good on that. Yeah.
Sorry, can you, with half the number of nests, so it's not half the number of adults that matches the number of
No,
nests?
half the number of adults, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you divide the number of adults you counted by 2 to give you the number of nests.
Right, but so we go on to the key to do the actual nest count as well. So we don't do fledgling success because we want to limit the disturbance. Yeah. So for the bridled and the least terns, we go at the height of the peak of the season. So some will have hatched already, but mostly we're counting eggs.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jennifer asking a question. Common terns flush and attack surveyors. Are there any aggressive seabirds in the Caribbean that would dive bomb at people? Any species to watch out for? Luis?
Well, least tern do that, but they don't go as close that common terns do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if roasted tern do the same thing here in Puerto Rico, because I never been in that colony, but I am assuming they do the same behavior.
Yeah, Rhiannon?
We had a noddy tern attack one of my research assistants last week,
Okay.
which is the first time I've seen that, like just knocked him on the head, full on, like made contact twice. So
Wow.
that was interesting. I've not seen that when they're actually, that for them it's the pre-breeding season. So, and it was night. So I'm not sure, that didn't happen during breeding season when they were on eggs or chicks. They just hunker down, but I guess they're capable of getting annoyed as well.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Watch your head when you go. Okay. So that was about total counts and flush counts. So let's move into a bigger colony, like we could have for sooty terns, for example. And a different methodology that we could use to do a sample count. So for a colony that has 1,000 of birds and probably disturbance linked to that, there are different methods which could be plots or quadrats. So you count species in the plot or transects. So who would like to discuss? Adriana, I see you nodding, so I will put you on the spot. No?
Well, I'm nodding, but I haven't count, for example, sooty terns in alacranes. There are, I don't know, I will say more than 1,000. It's crazy. So when we tried to do it, but just for fun, it was not a serious thing. We went to the lighthouse and choose several places and took pictures. But I never did a transect in that place for sooty terns. So I'm just nodding because it's a good idea, but I haven't done that.
Okay. So the lighthouse, and if you have a viewpoint, like something in elevation, that will be the same. And for people who don't, then people usually more use drones as well, which is having the same comparable methodology. Louise, Rhiannon, Jane, you've been counting on a big number of seabirds.
Yeah, so we have large numbers of sooty terns on quite a few keys here, and we are using a combination of drones and also subsampling in plots. The issue that we have is that drones are great when they're out in the open, but we find that they're quite often, for every bird you see in the open, there's like 4 or 5 nests which are hidden in grass, or just not accessible until you're almost on top of the nest. And so we're taking drone footage, but we're also sort of validating that to see how many we're missing by doing these detailed searches within plots. And we were developing it last year as we were learning about the colonies that hadn't been surveyed for long periods. But what we learned last year, we're implementing now. So we've marked up the plots in the last month before the birds come back, so that we have like visual markers. And then what we do is we land further away and we try and count the birds within the plots from a vantage point, so that they haven't flushed yet. And then we approach the plot, and quite often they will flush, but we try to count the birds that flush. So we know how many we saw from a vantage point, then how many we see flush. And then we go into the plot and we count anything else that hasn't flushed, that's hidden or that's just sat there, so that we kind of have 3 methods that we're able to then compare to see how our counts differ with those methods. And then we also are flying drones. So hopefully from that, we should be able to get an idea of how the different methods compare. But it's quite complex, and this isn't a normal situation here, in that we have a grant that allows us to trial these different methods. And I hope that something will come out of it that will help in other colonies and on other islands. But I think you're not able to sample at that level in most places. So I guess if you have limited funds and it's a quick land, quite often sooty terns do flush very quickly and readily. So we always do that anyway. If they do flush, we try and get a count in the air. But I think in my experience, it's always an underestimate of what's actually there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with these big numbers, and especially the difficulty when you have this kind of habitat too, with grasses and cactuses and hiding places.
Yeah, and it's so species specific, we're finding as well, what's really interesting, and I wanted to mention something that Jane was saying about disturbance and when you approach a colony, them flushing. I mean, the idea is, in an ideal, we'd never flush birds, right, that are breeding. We don't want to flush, but it does happen. But I think trying to find out as much as you can about the timing of breeding of your population is really important. And Louise can probably comment on this a lot as well, because I know she's done a lot of work on seabird breeding phonology and asynchronous behavior. But we have found here, even recently, that for the same species that breed on different islands, they're breeding at different times of year. So we have one key here, which has currently like 3,000 sooty terns all on chicks, but then nowhere else that I've been to yet in the Turks and Caicos Islands, in other keys here, have any breeding sooty terns, and they'll be a couple of months on. And that's in just the same country and same island, not far from each other. So I think getting as much prior information as you can, talking to people that have been around for a while, if it's a new site, to understand, so you don't miss the peak of breeding. Because last year we missed that peak of breeding on this key, and I had no idea that there was that many birds. It's just that we went this year and found that, oh my gosh, they're already all on chicks. So understanding that, or being aware of that in your sort of in terms of the times in which you visit your colonies for some terns, I think is really important.
Yeah. Louise, do you want to add on to that?
I just support that point from Rhiannon that you can't just go once and assume you're going to get all the birds. You probably discussed this in prior webinars, but we don't see it for sooty terns, but we definitely see it for the boobies in Anguilla. So we can have a whole load on one key and none on the other, and then 4 months later it's the reverse, it's the opposite. So you have to, it's good to have some kind of knowledge or plan to go more than once to survey these species, because you could just miss thousands because you've gone at the wrong key. But back to sooty terns. So we have a very big sooty tern colony on Dog Island, hundreds of thousands of nesting pairs, and they nest underneath scrub, so it's impenetrable. So you can't count them, you can't drone them, and so in that case, we're using circular plots. We take circular plots from inside the colony, so it still means we have to go into the colony and get scratched up, but it's much less than obviously trying to count them all. But the main problem we've had, we've overcome it. The main issue with that is that is mapping the perimeter of the colony, because to extrapolate up from the counts, you need to have an estimate of the size of the colony. And that we found that quite difficult on Dog Island. In 2012, we had tracks cut through the island for the rat eradication every 50 meters. So that was much easier. We had nice tracks to walk from, and we can get some nice accurate boundaries, but they've since grown up. So what we did last year is so it's a lot of scrub in the middle of the island, and then some nice low vegetation on the outside. So we would walk to the edge of the scrub, which isn't where the sooty terns necessarily would be breeding. They're breeding in the middle more, but we would take steps with us, take a rangefinder, and then two of us would be looking, trying to estimate the point that we see sooty terns going down into a nest. That makes sense. So it could be 50 meters in the vegetation. It could have been 100 meters into the vegetation. So we'd be using a rangefinder. So we would take a GPS from the edge where we were and look in and try and estimate the edge of the colony that way. Does that make sense? I could draw a diagram. And we were doing that. We did that at 50-meter intervals around the colony, around the island, so that we could. It's not going to be dead accurate, but it allowed us to make a colony, mark out the colony, but things scratched up significantly.
Yeah, that's sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, so
site specific, but it's a good idea. Yeah.
You can't work out how to do it accurately otherwise.
Yeah. And then so you mentioned circular plots, and then Rhiannon, you also mentioned plots. How do you choose where to put your plots? What size your plots are? Louise?
Well, in Anguilla, I just shared a paper. We've been following methodology that was established in 2007, and we haven't really reviewed that. Maybe we should. But there's different, although the habitat is all quite scrubby, there's notable differences in the habitats where the sooty terns nest. So there's some in really high scrubby vegetation, and there's some in an area that's quite low and grassy. So we split the island into these different habitats and do plots in each habitat type, and then work out the density for each habitat type, and then in that area, and then add them together to try and get a more accurate representation of numbers, because there are different densities across the island.
And the size of the plots?
We use 50-meter square plot, 50-meter
radius.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
so
the area is 50 meters.
oh, the area 50 meters. Okay. All right. And Rhiannon, you mentioned also plots. So you do same things.
Yeah, similar. So we stratify it by different habitat types because like densities can vary, and we use various ways to try and randomize where we put the plots so that you're not using some bias, subconscious bias when you're out there. I mean, we even use random number generators and get someone to walk, 7 paces that way, and then that's our first point. And so we do that within our habitats, or we do it in our GIS before we go with a grid that allows us to randomly sample within our different habitats. And in terms of the size of the plots, it depends on the density of the species of the birds. So you want big enough plots that you've got some birds in, like, they're big enough, but they're not too small. So, and there are methods to do it in terms of, we tested it, like, okay, if we did a 5 by 5 meter plot, what do we get if we did a 10 by 10? And I think in the Birds Caribbean manual that it says you should have at least 2 birds within the plot. Yeah. I don't know where that 2 came from, but yeah, we found that for many species here, like 10 by 10 works, and some it's 20 by 20. So it sort of just depended on the species and how clustered or diffuse they are in their sort of nesting behavior. So you kind of, it's trial and error, and I think you probably want to do those tests at the beginning to design your survey.
And so since you're doing it kind of randomly, you may end up with having plots with different habitats, right?
Well, we randomize within habitat type. Okay. So if I know that we want in an ideal world to get 10 within prickly pear cactus, then I just take all my prickly pear cactus habitat on the island, and within those areas we then randomize so that we can they fall within the habitat that we're looking for. And we always it depends, again, we use all kinds of things to mark the corners of the plots. I don't use circular plots because I found them really, there was a bit of a pain in the arse in the field. You usually end up with a rope that you have to lie over the plot and that you're walking, and it's difficult. And so we use square plots, because then we can put markers up with flagging tape that gives us the number of the waypoint, which relates to my GPS unit, so we can find them again. So if next year, a hurricane comes down and it's going to, obviously our poles aren't going to stay up throughout the year, but at least we have a point on my little electronic device that tells me where the plot is again, so we can then go back if we want to then do the same plots next year, if we decide to do that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Rhiannon mentioned the Caribbean Seabird Monitoring Manual. That's on the webpage that we shared earlier. I don't know if we shared the webpage in the chat, but that wasn't on the slide. Maybe Jennifer, could you, if you haven't done it so, could you share the link to the webpage, to the census webpage? And that would have the Caribbean Census Manual in English, Spanish, and French. And most of what we're discussing today is in there, maybe a bit more details as well. So we mentioned doing subsampling and then extrapolating you by habitat or by area, using different kind of plots, square plots. So it seems to be better than circle plots. We also mentioned asynchrony in the species, and so I'd like to ask Adriana and Luis, and then Melgar and Antonio, if you're still there, talking more about this question of asynchrony before we move on into different methodologies. So Luis, with release terns, is that something you observe as well on the mainland in your colonies?
The asynchrony,
Yeah. Are they all nesting together at the same time, or they're more spread out and between the different colonies?
well, they nest together. It kind of the same at the same time.
Okay.
Here, what I observed, yeah.
In the whole of the mainland, right?
Well, I don't know in the whole. I know in different, like in the south, they use the same kind of the time of.
Okay.
But I am assuming that they are doing the same in where in Puerto Rico at all. They are synchrony. They just arrive at the same time in, like you could see it in Eber when they arrive.
Yeah.
Starting people checking in. And
Yeah,
also I think in the US the same, they are doing the same at the same time, and kind of April-ish, mid-April they arrive and start nesting in late April.
Okay. It's good that you mentioned eBird as a tool to actually understand when they're coming back, when the birds are coming back, if you can. At least at the level of Puerto Rico for a big island, that's very useful. I'm guessing for more remote islands that people do not really visit, it's probably not as useful, but it's good to know. Adriana and Melgar and Alacranes, do you see? I'm guessing there is asynchrony. There's birds nesting mostly year round in Boobies.
Yes, Boobies. they have like these peaks, but sometimes they can follow the season like 3 or 4 years, and suddenly they don't. But almost every time you go to the islands, you can find nests. Well, almost, I don't know. But sooty terns, they are more predictable. They arrive like in late February and nests all together, and one day in September they go away. But boobies, and also red-footed boobies, well, they are not in the ground, but also they are not predictable at all. Frigate birds nest almost all the time, so maybe there are patterns, but not yearly patterns, but larger. So it's hard to know.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Antonio, are you still there?
Okay.
About the same question of synchrony in nesting and temporality of nesting.
Okay. According to my experience, in my workings, we found two main patterns about asynchrony. First, with respect between species, when we consider the same breeding season, we found a highly synchrony between species, with some of them started before, some later, but the difference in this time is very short. And I think that maybe to use the optimal food availability during the season, in the summer of the tropical waters maybe. And the second important details is at intraspecific level, because some species started the breeding with very synchronous pattern. Mainly the species with highly gregarious behavior, such as royal tern, sandwich tern, prosaic tern, for example, in few weeks, including less than 10 days sometimes, there is that all the colonies ready to start the producing of the eggs, for example. But with respect for example, laughing gull, there is no the same pattern. Laughing gull started its laying, for example, in specific weeks, and after maybe 4 weeks, the process was continuous. So this variability could maybe possibly possibilitate the breeding in the same case with respect to the tropical waters when not usually the food is enough available. So to summarize, the synchrony is relative. First, between species, and second, inside the same species.
Yeah.
But the general tendency is that with the high synchronism.
Okay, thank you. Good analysis. So moving on back to methods for census. So we mentioned plots. Has any of one of you used transects or distance sampling? No, I see shaking heads.
We use transects in on islands where there's really clear environmental gradients.
Mm-hmm.
So it works really well. We did it with Jane and I did it in the DOE with the Booby Pond because the arboreal tree nesting seabirds there. It's a really nice gradient of different habitats. So that's where transects really work well. And we've got keys here where again your habitat there's bands that kind of run along the coast. So the further you get away from the coast, you go from one habitat to the next, and that works really, really well within those areas. But I think it lends itself best to places where you've got these really clear change in habitat types as you move along a line.
And so how do you extrapolate after?
I guess it's the same. You need to know the boundaries of your colony, which may require some pre-sampling or walking. When we would at the beginning of the developing the drone methods, and Jane can talk about this as well, in the Booby Pond, it required walking way huge distances and like a couple of weeks of sampling to figure out where the boundaries of that colony were, so then we could subsample and place our transects, randomly sample where the transects started to then do the proper survey. So, and I guess Louise has got her methods as well for different species for how to define where your boundary sort of starts and ends so that you can subsample within the whole colony space.
I see a question by Guillaume. I think we'll go back to the question at the end, and then we'll keep discussing methodology. So to go back, we mentioned total counts, flush counts, subsampling in plots and transects, and we also mentioned here and there drones as a sometimes good method, sometimes not. Doesn't work in Louise's cases when there's a lot of cover. I know there is a webinar, and the link to it has been shared in the chat about drones, but we could also mention it here and discuss it here a little bit. All right, who is using drones? So I know Jan, Rhiannon, Louise, you tried it but didn't work. Melgar, you tried drone as well, I think. And then Luis, have you been using it for Terns? No. Yeah. Go ahead, Melgar.
What is it?
I was asking if you are using drones. Yeah, you mentioned photo mosaic. So you are using drones for boobies. And so when you do it, do you? I forgot what you said earlier. I'm sorry, but how do you compare the numbers you get from the drones to what is actually nesting on the ground? Do you do visual check?
Okay. This is the photo mosaic is on the projects and in the software the ArcGIS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what is the release and the count?
Yeah.
But this is a permit is very important. This is in the points in the photo mosaic is under one register in the table in the software. Okay, is for me is important or relevant. What is the rest the count? Okay, what is exact in the count and the individual, the species. no noise is estimate. It's real. Okay.
Yeah, because in the case of boobies, they're big enough so you're sure you're counting all of them. Yeah. And so in cases for, like, for example, terns, where you have a big number of them, have you used it as well, Jen or Rhiannon?
We tried drones for our terns, but that did not work well at all, just because you can't, these tern eggs are so camouflaged, and the bridle are usually under the ledges of rocky outcrops and so forth. So the only time we actually successfully use drones is for the areas on the Brack, which has a sheer cliff face, a bluff, that is extremely treacherous to walk, and we don't want, obviously, to compromise health and safety. And also there's a lot of times that boobies nest on the ledges that you can't actually see from the top. So we use the drone flying one way with one angle and coming back the other way with another angle, so that we can see both on top and on the actual cliff face. And then you'd have to take the sun and sun direction and everything else into account. But because they're boobies, they're pretty easy to spot sitting on the nest. So we've had great success with that. And in the beginning with Rhiannon, we did do the ground counts as well. Very dangerous, but we did, and we could cross-reference the ground with the drone. And since then, we've decided to stick with the drones for certain areas of the wreck.
Okay.
Literally blood, sweat, and tears.
See, I think so. This is very important. This on the model, the drone is on the different characteristic technique. The drone is very important now. It's now not is possible to use minis drone or drones no con difficult the techniques. What is it? And my drone is in the monitor. This is a Mavic 2 Pro, because it's good. The resolution, the camera, the sensor is just very good. This is also a difference. For instance, in the cons in the birds is and Rhiannon. This is the very important the wind and sound says is the oars and the fly, the drone. It's very important.
Yeah. All right, it's almost an hour, so we'll try to wrap up soon. And I forgot about you because you're not on the camera. I just saw your name. Do you want to add something to it about your experience in Jamaica?
I mean, I think that, we've got one of the things that I don't know the answer to is, like, very often my experience is that I don't have a budget. So I sometimes can only get to a colony once in a season. And I may or may not have any information about when the peak nesting might be. And I think it's a question that like, if you can only get to a colony once or twice, like, how can you interpret what you see? And also I think there's a whole thing about indices, like, in terms of, like when you see birds in flight, because I've had the experience that I've been to a colony and there's, substantial, like thousands of birds in the air. When I go and look on the ground, there's no nests at all. So I don't know whether that's what's causing that, whether it's as a result of predation by people or rats. But yes, the problem of how to interpret it when you don't have resources and can't do multiple visits. That's a question that I don't know the answer to. I'd love to get comments from anybody.
Yeah.
I think
always. Are we not hearing you, Luis, again? I think it's the same problem as before.
Yeah.
Oh, you're
no.
back. You're back.
So it will be depend when you are trying to do the survey. If you don't have any funding for do it, try to do it in the peak of the season, the nesting season. That will be accurate. Well, not accurate, but at least you have a good numbers of both birds and nests, and you can compare instead going randomly. Okay, now I'm going to visit and happens what you say, and that you went to the colony, see a lot of birds, but no nest. So that could be or too early or too far from the nesting season.
Yeah, it was actually like when I thought it was supposed to be in the nesting season. So, but yeah. I don't know.
I think.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think here it could change. Like in the Caribbean, it could change a little bit from the main, like the United States or any other places. Could be the season change a little bit. Like is like right now I'm working with shorebirds and I already see Wilson's plover chicks like 14 days old, and if you go to the literature, they say they're still starting nesting right now. Like it doesn't match, so it depends. I think it will be depending in the food sources, if they have a good food source or richer ones right now. Like in that season, they will nest earlier instead nesting. I don't know if the other one had the same thoughts that I had.
Yeah. Rhiannon, you had your hand raised, and then Jan.
Yeah, no, I agree about the breeding, timing of breeding. It's such a key thing to all this. And I think, I don't know if anyone said this already, because yeah, we have differences in populations, but also the same population can vary year after year and when the timings of when they breed. And I think Louise, you found that in some of your colonies, haven't you? But something that I'm a real fan of, which we're using more and more to try and gain information on this for colonies that haven't really been studied for 20 years or never, is trail cameras. So we're using, and you can get relatively cheap and cheerful ones. You have to maintain them, which is the problem. There are ways around it by hooking them up to car batteries and things. Like people do that in inaccessible areas so they last for longer. But if you can get trail cameras that can just be set up and put in front of a number of nests, so that you can gain information on when the birds come back and when their peak breeding season is, then that can really help. But with anything, it requires money. But I think in terms of the cost sometimes of getting boats to some of these places and bringing a team in can be relatively, they're remote devices that can continue collecting data for you. And we found them incredibly useful here. I think they're underused.
Yeah, it's a good idea too. So trail cameras or camera traps. Jen?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment on Anne's question too, because I had the situation happen last year where I went to a small key that the previous year I got half the number of adults in terms of nests on the 4th of June. But this last year, because of a weather window, I had to go on the 23rd of May, which, is not that much different. But I got, 8 nests and 75 flushed adults. So, it is really key to know your site and and be able to go, say, multiple times in 1 year to understand. Of course, it can be, year by year variation. But certainly between the 23rd of May and 4th of June made all the difference to that small key. So that was a big sort of learning experience for me. And of course, you have to get the weather window and everything right. But yeah.
And Antonio, so you've been working for your PhD on something on this question as well, visiting the colony only once or a few times. Can you talk to us a little bit, or we need to wait for the paper to come out?
Okay. Sorry, I had a cut of the connection and stopped by continuing. Okay, to summarize my main recommendation, according to the explained by the rest of the colleagues, is that to start to do any survey of monitoring in seabirds colonies, there are two main types of characteristics to take in account. First, the characteristics of the island, of the cay, of the specific place where the colony will be establishment. In this sense, it's important to consider the size of the fragments and the heterogeneity in the landscape according to the habitat characteristics, because it's the type, the method, the selected method to monitoring could be related according to these characteristics. And the second one is the specific characteristics of the species. We need to be sure at first what species could be bred in this habitat, and the probable size of the colony according to the rest of the methods explained by the colleagues. Sometimes could be possible to do a full count of the colony if it is small. Of the contrary, it's like another method, we have drones, squares of points. But one key tip in this sense is to know previously the selective patterns of the species to breed, specifically to the nesting sites, because for example, taking account and a specific group such as larids, including gulls and terns, there are different patterns, contrasting patterns between species. For example, gulls tend to be a generalist species in all aspects, such as trophy, habitat selective patterns, and could be exploit a lot of different combination of habitats. But terns, for example, could be, on the contrary, very, very selective species with contrasting patterns. Some species, such as very similar sooty and brittle tern, for example, has different selective patterns. Sooty terns tend to put its eggs basically covered by vegetation, but brittle tern no. Brittle tern select any type of structure, rocks or plants, for example, to select. So depending of these patterns, the people that will be the monitoring could apply different methods depending on the species. Some gregarious species, such as previously explained by me, Ten Royal and Sandwich family, are very easy to count. They are very visible. But when species such as brittle tern that use caves, small caves or cavity around the rocky substratum, could be very difficult to detect. That is important. That's previously explaining aspects such as the time to do the count. And I could suggest, for example, for the people, because sometimes some island could be very rocky, with very rocky substratum, and to detect the nest, you sometimes need to search an indirect signals, such as rest of food, such as a rest of chicks of the chicks or adults. And my main advice in this sense is, if the species that nest in cavities or rocky substratum, you don't subestimate any type of cavity. If apparently any small cavity could be not be used, no, you need to search to be sure that you are to do a full count in this sense. But the selective pattern is key to any monitor.
Thank you. Yeah, and Antonio mentioned cavity nesters. So we had the previous species hour on that. So I recommend also watching the webinar. It's good that you mentioned again the species that nest undercover. on the ground undercover, and maybe there is interest from the group, from the whole seabird people in the Caribbean. We may have another species hours specifically on those species that nest undercover that are more difficult to count than just counting them from a drone or visually. Sorry, without having to go and look under things to count them. All right, so we've been over an hour now. Unless we've missed some very important points. Anne is raising her hand.
Not a very important point, but just a question. Like, there's some species like roseate, like some species have like strong nest site fidelity, and others move around, like roseate terns. And I just wondered whether anybody had any experience with roseate terns and what to do when your colony disappears. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not moved somewhere else. And I just wondered if there were any approaches to that.
Louise, go ahead. Yeah.
So in the Virgin Islands, that happens a lot. Well, almost every year, the roseate terns move between not just within a country, but between countries, because the islands are so close together. So what they do when they have funds is they have to. I mean, you need funds, but you need to be able to survey all the keys. They survey all the keys, all the historic keys that had roseate terns, and they'll be on one of them. But you don't know from year to year. So yeah, you need money, I guess, Anne, to survey all your keys.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the need for coordination and information sharing, and that's why this group is so important, so we can work together on some of these things.
Yeah, I could see there was an agenda behind your question, and yeah, I mean it's good that you mentioned that collaboration. This is the point of this seabird group, trying to get people to know each other and to chat with each other about where the birds could be going, because they don't care if they're in Guadeloupe or they're in Dominica or they're somewhere else north. You mentioned roseate terns moving. Least terns also move a lot. So that's something that feel free, all of you, to send questions on the listserv, and we'll share the link again before we forget, to the listserv. Send question about, have you seen least terns this year? Have you seen roseate terns this year? Because they're not where they used to be. Rhiannon?
I just wanted to mention the gull-billed terns as well, because we haven't mentioned them yet. We found that they're really difficult to survey because they don't really nest in colonies. They just like scattered nests, which is problematic. I'm just trying to figure out how we approach that, because we've kind of done, like you just said, broad searches across all the keys last year, which is smacking great effort. And we've got areas where we know they're nesting, and you see them when you do boat surveys. And I know that, okay, that area is but this is like an island which, again, you have to use some kind of random sampling within habitat types. But the chances of coming across a gull, they're just notoriously difficult to sample. And I think it's just really, I don't know what the solution is other than having whacking great teams and loads of money, but we know that that's never possible. So I think just being aware of those species that are very difficult to survey is really important, and not forget about them, because the tendency is to go, they're just really hard to survey, so we can't do it. But actually, then what do we know about those species that are more kind of elusive, and how do we protect them? And what are the threats? And I think it's just something to think about. Just a comment I was just thinking about, but I don't really know what to answer it.
No, it's good. And maybe we should have a species hour specifically on those species that are very hard to count, because they're so specific habitat they require. Yeah. All right. So I think it'll be time to go soon. We had one question. Well, Guillaume asked a question about nesting substrate, but he left. And since he's going to ask it on the listserv, so maybe we won't answer now. And then Francisco Contreras asked about when will we get the first results from the census? So Louise is our new coordinator. She's still around. I don't see you. Oh, you're here. Yeah. You moved. The cameras moved. So you're going to start asking for updates, right?
I'm gonna be emailing everyone, finding out everyone's progress and trying to encourage the data to be submitted as it's being collected.
Thank you. And then we'll share about those, well, some updates so far, maybe in June in our next newsletter. We used to have a newsletter in spring, we're a bit late now, but hopefully in June we'll have our newsletter with our first updates on the census. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I think Jonathan and Jeremy, you probably had the time wrong because you signed it at the end, but we've been recording. And Damien, yeah. All right, sorry. I'll answer Damien's question. So Damien is asking where to share his data. So we have data sheets that we've been sharing on our website. I will share the link to our webpage again in the chat. And so there, towards the bottom, you should find data sheets. So there are field data sheets that you can use in the field and in a reporting database, which is more like an Excel spreadsheet. So you can use that Excel spreadsheet to report your data. And we ask if you can report a summary of the data, which is at the end of your season, report a summary of the number you had during the season. Thank you, Damien. And so, all right, so I see a lot of messages going on. Yes, papers for Journal of Caribbean Ornithology. Thank you, Rhiannon, for being there. Anyway, I was going to say this session has been recorded. So if you came too late, well, you can watch the whole session on YouTube. Well, I will share the link next year. No, sorry, not next year. Next week on the listserv. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists for attending and spending time with us. It was great, a great discussion to have a different point of view, different methodologies, and from different parts of the Northern Caribbean. So that was great. Lisa, do you want to say the last words?
Yeah, just thank you so much to all the panelists. This has been really, really helpful and interesting. And hopefully everybody gained a lot by attending. And yeah, I encourage you to keep asking questions on the listserv. And finally, thank you also to Adrian Tassis for jumping in and doing closed caption translation for us. So everybody stay in touch and good luck with your surveys. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Hasta luego.